Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's Timothy here with Mana Rocks. We're gonna go ahead and continue our review of the Ikoria spoilers. Less of a review and more of just like looking through the spoilers together and kind of seeing what's here for the new set. It is the weekend. I'm recording this on a Saturday, so basically we're gonna be covering the spoilers that straggled off in the second half of yesterday. We left off with this cycling card that exiles enchantments. We're going to pick up with another companion here, and then we're just going to cover about, I think it's about 10, 11, 12 cards that were spoiled between yesterday and up till today. It is the weekend. They don't generally do a lot of spoilers on the weekend, so that's what we're going to go ahead and cover in this video. And then we've got a bunch of Commander spoilers as well from Commander 2020, and we'll probably just do that in a separate video to keep these kind of shorter since, you know, they run quite a while. I can talk for a very long time about certain cards. First off, any new subscribers to the channel, welcome. This is not something I generally do for sets. It's mostly because, you know, there's a lot of free time given the circumstances in the world right now. But if people enjoy this sort of thing, I might try to carve out time to do it. When future sets release, it's just really hard when I have an actual work schedule to go by. Second off, feel free to subscribe below if this has made your day better in any way, shape, or form. Feel free to drop a subscription. Not necessary to watch the content, but I would appreciate it. And also, you can find us on Twitter at MTD_Manarocks. So yeah, let's go ahead and stop with the chit chat and talk about some cards. So, like I said, we're going to kick off with a companion here. This is Obosh the Burrower. So this is going to be your odd costed companion. We saw the Kraken that cared about even costed cards. This is your odd companion. I don't know how else to say that. Obosh the Burrower is 3 Rakdos, so 5 mana total. 2 of it has to be hybrid red or black mana. It is a 3/5, very odd. It is a Hellion Horror legendary creature, a rare. I believe the entire cycle is rare. And the companion says that each non-land card in your starting deck must have an odd converted mana cost. So I wanted to clarify a couple things about Companion because it seems like there's a lot of confusion about how it works in Commander in particular. You know, in Limited and Constructed, it's pretty straightforward. It's in your sideboard, and if you meet that Companion requirement, you can cast it from your sideboard, right? But in Commander, you're actually going to reveal this at the beginning of the game. It's going to be face up to all players. I believe that's true in Constructed and Limited as well. But everybody knows, and it does have to meet the color requirements of your commander, right? If my commander can't support a red and black card, I can't play Obosh as my companion. And obviously the companion restriction has to be true for your deck, which, you know, people are going to hold each other to that, right? Obviously, if you're choosing Obosh as a companion, I keep wanting to say commander, if you choose Obosh as a companion, then you're trying to build a funky deck, right? A deck of all odd costed cards, and you know, you're not going to try to cheat that companion for that reason, right? The other thing I wanted to mention about companions, there was something else, but I completely just blanked on it. So anyway, let's go ahead and read Obosh. The effect you get here off of the card is that whenever a source you control with an odd converted mana cost deals any damage, double that damage instead. So it's interesting. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah, you can still run something like Obosh as your commander, not a companion, but as your actual commander, and then it's one of the 100 cards in your deck. If that's the case, you don't have to care about the companion clause at all. The companion clause only matters if you are trying to use this as your companion, right? The deck building restriction does not matter if this is a card in your 99 or if this is the commander itself. And I could see people potentially even playing this as a commander and then just running a bunch of odd costed, you know, it doesn't even have to be burn spells, but just odd costed cards in general. This doubles all damage done by your odd costed cards, which is really nice with fireball type effects. Although you have to be careful because something like Comet Storm, if this is your companion, you can't play something like Comet Storm because even though it has an X in its mana cost and you can make it odd when you cast it by, you know, putting a certain amount into X, it is an even costed card when it's not on the stack, right? Comet Storm is red X, and that is an even cost and an even casting cost There we go, figured it out. When it's in your deck, so you wouldn't be able to run that if Obosh is your companion. But any fireball that's like red X, like Devil's Play, Burn from Within, Crater's Claws, stuff like that, those are all odd costed cards. Even though when you cast them on the stack, if X is an odd number, you actually make the converted mana cost even. Which is interesting, right? Because Obosh only doubles odd costed cards, which means you would have to make sure X is always an even number for those fireballs in order for it to double. But yeah, Obosh in limited seems like a strong card, not something that I'm going to mess up my mana cost for, because honestly, if my deck is full of odd costed cards that deal damage, and note that this doubles damage from your creatures as well, then, I would not mind just drawing Obosh, right? And it affects itself too, so it basically attacks and blocks as a 6/5. It affects all of your odd-costed creatures, so on and so forth. If somehow I end up with a deck that has no 2-drops that I want to play, or 4-drops that I want to play in Limited, then sure, I might put Obosh in the sideboard. But then I can't play 6-drops, and I love 6-drops. But anyway, we've seen an even-costed, odd-costed companion. Be interesting to see what other restrictions they put on us with companions. Some people are guessing that there might be human, non-human, stuff like that. Who knows? I guess we'll find out, right? No instant, stuff like that. It could be literally anything. We saw one that was all of your cards had to be 3 or greater. There might be one that says all of your cards have to be 2 or less, which would be a really interesting commander deck. But probably a completely unplayable limited deck, and I have no idea how that would work for constructed. But moving on from our companion into a Mythic Rare. I was a little confused why this card was a Mythic Rare at first, and then I kind of understood it, right? So Rael the Everwise is 1 blue-red for a 0/3 Mythic Legendary Human Wizard. 3 mana 0/3 Mythic. Love it. It gets +1/+0 for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard, so it can get bigger. In Limited, I don't know how many instants or sorceries you're going to be running in a deck, but, if this is like at least a 3/3 or 4/3 for 3 mana, that's pretty good. Even though cards like this, they tend to be late game cards if you care about the power and toughness. Like, think Enigma Drake, Spell Chaser, Chimera, stuff like that. These cards that always get pumped equal to the power, or equal to the number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard. Usually those are cards that have flying, they have some sort of evasion. Rael does not. So I don't think you really care what the power of this card is, because you want it to really just sit on board. You're never blocking with it when it comes to a game of Commander or anything like that. But the real thing that makes it a Mythic here is whenever you discard 1 or more cards, and that's super important, whenever you discard 1 or more cards for the first time each turn, draw that many cards. So clearly this is kind of planted in here for cycling, right? If Rael is on board and you cycle a card, you are going to discard that card, which will trigger Rael, and you'll draw a card, plus you'll draw the card that you were initially going to draw off cycling in the first place, right? So every card that you cycle, or at least the first card you cycle each turn, is going to draw you 2 cards, which is really good, especially since a lot of the cycling cards in this set cost like 1 or 2 mana to cycle. So you're actually going up cards by just, cycling away cards you don't care about. This is the type of card that if I had it in my limited deck, I would be tempted to run some of the off-color cyclers that just cycle for cheap, like these Artifact, Enchantment, Destruction cards, just because, paying 1 mana to discard a card and draw 2 cards is really good. And it's each turn, not each of your turns, it's each turn. Similar to the cycling commander that we saw, the 2/5 that makes 2/2 cat dragons or whatever. Rael has the potential to cycle a card on your turn, draw 2 cards, and then when it goes to your opponent's turn, cycle another card, draw 2 cards. You can just bury your opponent in card advantage there, as long as you have enough cyclers. Now, even that I don't think would be like the most mythic card in the world, but the real important thing here is that it says whenever you discard 1 or more cards, draw that many. So if you look into Commander, where you have wheel effects, where you can discard any number of cards to do whatever, you're going to draw basically twice as many cards off of any given wheel, right? If you cast a Wheel of Fortune and you discard 4 cards to your own Wheel of Fortune, you are going to draw 4 cards off Rael, and you're going to draw the additional 7 cards off of the Wheel of Fortune. So it turns wheels into like super wheels, right? Has the same effect on every other opponent, but has the same effect on each other opponent, right? They're still going to wheel as normal, but you basically get to double up your wheel and get a second hand, right? It is only the first time you discard each turn, so you can't like wheel. But decks like that, if that's what you're trying to do, then go for it. Like I'm thinking Arjun, think Teferi's Puzzle Box, something like that. You can just double up the number of cards that you have in your hand each turn, basically. And Rael has an extra little bonus, just an extra little bonus, which will probably come up in limited more than anything else. But if Rael is on board and your opponent on their turn, they like mind rot you, or something like that, they make you discard cards. Let's say they mind rot you, you're just going to draw those cards back, right? As long as they're not individual discards. If they go, make you discard a card, make you discard a card, make you discard a card, then you're only going to draw one of those cards back. But if they go 3 mana, make you discard 2 cards, then Rael will trigger and you'll just draw 2 cards back, assuming that you haven't already drawn extra cards off of her ability since it is once per turn. But I think that does qualify being a Mythic just because in other formats outside of Limited, this is a potential powerhouse that can just draw you so many extra cards. I don't know about Vintage and Legacy, the formats where memory jars and time twisters and stuff are running amok, but it seems like there's some potential there. I'll leave it to those people to go ahead and break it in those formats, but I do think there's like Nekusar decks, Locust God decks, stuff like that would be very interested in playing Rael the Everwise. In Limited, we'll see how good the Cyclone deck is, but it seems like a pretty strong card in Limited if you can pick up enough Cyclers. It was only a matter of time before we got the Sharknado card, but here you go. Shark Typhoon. Look, it's a cool card. I'm not knocking it. It's just like, really? Anyway, so Shark Typhoon is 5 and a blue for a rare enchantment, and it's a spell payoff, basically. A spell cyclone payoff, which is kind of nice. It says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create an XX blue shark creature token with flying, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. So metallurgic summons, but it makes flying sharks instead of construct or whatever that card made. So this is pretty cool, right? Now, the problem, of course, is that it costs 6 mana, right? If you're playing a game of Limited, this has the potential to be just a very powerful card in a spell-based deck, but you need to stick a 6 mana enchantment and then do other stuff. That's usually the hallmark of a card that just barely misses bomb status, but who knows, maybe this is a slower format and you can afford to take turn 6 off while your opponent's playing the 11/11 Trampler or whatever. Thankfully, there's a little bit of upside, I guess, alternative to it. It has Cyclone for X, 1 in blue, so 2 mana and then X, and it says whenever you cycle Shark Typhoon, create an XX blue shark creature token with flying. So you have the option to stick this for 6 mana and then start making flying sharks every time you cast a spell, which is a nice build around type card. If you can stabilize the board and survive to the point where you can stick a 6 mana enchantment and then you have other spells in your hand or draw spells, things of that nature, you should be able to turn this into a win, right? This is the type of card that in Limited an entire deck is based around, and it seems like it's probably worth going for. If you've got enough removal, maybe even counter spells, stuff like that, and you can control the board up to 6 mana and then get to a safe spot where you can stick this, every other spell that you cast for the rest of the game is going to make a flying shark. It might be a 1/1 or a 2/2 that chump blocks. You might cast a 5-drop and make a 5/5 flyer, which is pretty insane. You probably have to make a good 2 or 3 creatures before it becomes worth it to play Shark Typhoon, but in Limited, this is a card I think I'm going to be excited to play. And then the Cyclone actually just pushes this over the top, right? Because it gives you an alternative. If you're playing a faster game and you just need to block, you're not going to be able to get to 6 mana, stick your Shark Typhoon, and then hope that everything is right. Fingers crossed your opponent doesn't kill you that turn, that sort of thing. So you just cycle it away, right? And the Cyclone cost is a little bit expensive, right? If you want to make a 1/1 flyer, you have to pay 3 mana, right? 1 blue and 1. But you might make a 3/3 flyer for 5 mana, and the important part is that that's instant speed, right? Because you can cycle at instant speed and then create that shark token at instant speed. Plus, always remember, and this is something that people always forget when they're evaluating cycling cards, is every time you cycle, you replace that card, right? So anytime you get a trigger off of cycling a card, you're not down a card, you're up whatever the advantage was. So if you can do this, so for, let's say, X is 3, 5 mana, discard it, make a 3/3 flash flyer, and then draw another card. That's pretty good, right? A 5-mana 3/3 flyer with flash that draws a card is really good, and this has the potential to be bigger than that. It has the potential to just be an enchantment that makes you a ton of flyers. And maybe on turn 3, your opponent's attacking you with a 3/1, and you just cycle this X as 1, make a 1/1 flash fire, draw a card, and trade off. That seems pretty good too. So it's an extremely flexible card. It does require a little bit of a game plan, but cycling gives it kind of this fallback that makes it just a solid card in general. So I imagine this is going to be a very strong card in Limited, and they did it. They made a Sharknado, I guess. I don't know if we needed that. I don't know when Sharknado was the craze. That was like back when I was in high school or something, but I don't know. Maybe missed the mark on it. But there you go. There's your Sharknado card. Next up, we've got another one of the Mythos Cycle. So again, these are monocolored cards that give you an extra benefit or a bonus if you are able to pay the other 2 colors in that wedge, in that Apex's colors, right? This is the Sultai one. So it's a mono green card. It's 2 green, and the effect you get is return up to 2 target permanents from your graveyard to your hand. So if you just pay 2 green and you did not pay the extra blue-black, you're paying 4 mana to get 2 permanents back to your hand. And that's probably fine, right? 4 mana is where this sort of effect is probably worth it in Limited. 5 mana plus, I need an extra little bonus before I'm super excited about that. But you do get a bonus here if you play blue-black, right? It says if blue-black was used to cast this spell, search your library for a card and put it into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. And obviously that's on the card before you return the permanents, and you don't have to target for anything on this card. So if you pay green, blue, black to cast this spell, you first search for 2 cards. Search for 1 card, put it in your graveyard, and then you get to return 2 cards from your graveyard to your hand, one of which will presumably be the card that you just dumped into your graveyard. Not necessarily, but probably, right? And what this means is if you pay the full kicker cost for this, whatever you want to call it, then you're basically diabolic tutoring. You are searching for a card and putting it in your hand. You know, the fact that it hits the graveyard and then goes to your hand is all like minutia, really. It's just a way to make this card work the way they want it to. But the overall effect is that you're going to get a permanent back from your graveyard, and you're going to get a permanent from your deck. And for 4 mana, that's pretty good. It's a 2-for-1, so in Limited, that's pretty nice. It does ask that you play a little bit of blue and a little bit of black. But, 4 mana to get 2 permanents back is not necessarily the worst deal in the world when it comes to Limited. So you don't necessarily have to push this like some of the other ones. Like the white one, the Tragic Arrogance one. I think you basically have to be white, red, black for that card to be really good in Limited. This one, not necessarily, but the bonus is nice, right? In Limited, being able to tutor up your best card is pretty strong. And getting another card on top of it is nice. I would never play a Diabolic Tutor in Limited. Never. Like 4 mana, search for a card, put in my hand. I would never play it. It's too slow, and taking turn 4 off to go get your best card is not usually worth it. You just end up dying in most situations. But when you get an extra card off of the deal, then we're really talking. So again, I'm not sure how much you want to push your mana to make this card work. If you've just got a deck full of creatures and stuff like that, then you're probably pretty happy running this in your green deck. But hey, if you're already in the wedge, if you're already playing Sultai, or I don't know if we're going to be calling it by the new names. If we're playing Brokos, if that's the color combination we're playing, then you'll be pretty happy. And I can see this card doing a lot of work in Commander as well. People love tutoring in Commander, so I'm not going to knock them. Tutoring's fun. Next up, we've got a Bird Goat, because of course we got a Bird Goat. It's a Storm Wild Caprador. I think a Caprador is like a type of goat cheese or something. I don't know. You can let me know. I'm not going to look it up. But Storm Wild Caprador is 2 and a white for a 1/3 uncommon Bird Goat with flying. So 2 and a white for a 1/3 flyer is not very good. 1 and a white for a 1/3 flyer would be like acceptable, but not very good. You probably wouldn't play that card that often, like a Pegasus Courser, not Pegasus Courser, Concordia Pegasus, something like that, right? Just not a card you're excited to play unless there's some sort of like pumping effects going on or something like that. But this has got a neat effect. It says if non-combat damage would be dealt to Stormwind Caprador, prevent that damage, put a 1/1 counter on Stormwind Caprador for each 1 damage prevented this way. So this gets bigger whenever it takes damage, but doesn't count combat damage, obviously. So, you block a 3/3, this thing isn't going to survive, it's dead. What it does mean is if there's any sort of way to make it fight, or maybe burn it, or something along those lines, maybe like a hurricane type effect, deal X damage to target flyer, then Stormwild Caprador will get actually gigantic. In fact, we've already seen the red cycling card, I think it was called Shredded Sails. It dealt 4 damage to target flyer. You can use this on Stormwild Caprador, and the Caprador will get 4 counters. It'll be a 5/8, 5/7 flyer, and that's pretty wild. And that card has Cyclone, so it's pretty free to run it in your deck if you have this sort of card. I don't know if this is fit in some sort of strategy or anything like that in the set, or if it's just kind of like its own standalone card. Like, I don't know if there are other cards that are going to care about you dealing non-combat damage to them. But there are some fights, and this does get around some of the removal, right? It's basically immune to burn. You're not burning this card. It's not going to happen. You're going to make it bigger. It's immune to fights, right? Fight is non-combat damage. There's that bite card, the 3-mana green sorcery that said reveal a creature, deal damage to a target equal to the revealed creature's power or mana cost, maybe. This card is immune to that. So if this card is on board against a red-green deck, it's basically never going to die and never going to get targeted by anything unless it dies in combat, which I think is pretty sweet. It also means that this is a nice target for mutate, right? If you're against a deck that's going to have a hard time dealing non-combat damage to a creature to kill it, then you can mutate onto this thing and it's pretty safe, right? It's not like it has hexproof, can still be bounced and all that stuff, so it's not completely immune to everything. It can still be destroyed, stuff of that nature. It can be death touched off in combat. It can still die in combat, but it does blank a lot of the removal that you're going to see in a standard set. So I don't know. Again, I don't know that this is fit in any sort of strategy or an archetype, but we'll see if there's any other card like this in the set. And I think it's pretty cool. It does need work, right? If I'm playing this card, I'm probably looking for ways that I can deal damage to it myself. If I have a fight spell or something along those lines in my deck, then I'm a little more excited about this, because a 3-mana 1/3 is not going to cut it. But if I have ways to pump it myself and this can brick wall some of my opponent's removal, then sure, I think I'm pretty happy with it. It's also a bird goat, because why not? And look, bird goat is pretty crazy, but shark beast, this shark just has like man hands. I know they're like little claws or whatever, but they just like from a distance, this just looks like a shark that's like squaring up to like punch you in the face or something like that. Like, what does this shark do? Does it bite you, or does it like claw you, or does it do both? Because that seems like the most terrifying thing I can think of. Anyway, pouncing shore shark. It's a 4/3 for 4 and a blue. It has flash, a lot of flash in this set from what I'm noticing. It says whenever this creature mutates, you may return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. I love bounce spells. It's like my favorite thing to do in Limited is just sit there and bounce stuff. I know over the course of a game it's card disadvantage, but I love bouncing stuff. I'm sorry, it's just who I am. It also has mutate, obviously, for 3 and a blue, and we're seeing a lot of mutate costs on mutate creatures that cost 5 and mutate for 4. That seems like a little bit of a standard, right? Now, if this comes down and you can eat a creature in combat because it has flash, and then also bounce a creature because you mutated it, that's pretty good, right? That's got a lot of potential to just blow people out, and that's probably why this card is an uncommon. Also, I believe, now correct me if I'm wrong, you can let me know in the comments, because mutate is such a complicated mechanic. If your opponent has a bunch of creatures that are all mutated onto one, that is treated as one object, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. So if you bounce that object, if you bounce that creature, everything on that stack should go back to its owner's hand. I don't think the mutated creatures like fall off and go to the graveyard like an aura would. I believe it's just you pick up the pile of mutated creatures, and even if they're all creatures that were all on the same thing, they all go back to your hand. So bounce can be both really effective against mutate because it sends everything back to the hand, but it could also be bad because now they might have like put 3 cards back in their hand and they can kind of rearrange things, mutate in different ways, get their mutate triggers. So I don't know if bounce is going to be a net negative or a net positive for this set, and I haven't seen a lot of it yet. We've really only seen Pounce and Shore Shark. I don't think we've seen any other bounce spell, so be a little careful, and let's make sure we read up on the rules for Mutate before we get into like our pre-releases and stuff, because this has the ability to backfire, and it only targets your opponent's creature, so you can't like Shore Shark your own creature back to your hand and then do the same thing to yourself or anything like that. But 5 mana 4/3 flash that has a little bit of upside. Seems like a solid card, and again, I'm a big fan of bounce spells, so I'm going to be playing me a decent number of Shore Sharks. I had to cut ahead for a second, but our next card is Ikoria. I don't know what that means, but the translation says Ikoria, so we're going to call it Ikoria for now. It is 2 black green for a 4/4, and it says when Ikoria... I'm sorry. Yeah, it is 2 black green. It also says okay, never mind. The translation is absolutely correct. I just don't know how to read. So the mutate cost is the same, except it gives you hybrid mana instead of just black green, right? So this can be 2 black black or 2 green green to mutate. It says when Ikoria mutates, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Okay, so that seems pretty strong. There's just so many of these mutate cards that just seem super powerful to me. Like, so many of them give you card advantage if you can continue mutating. And like we said in previous videos, the risk of mutating over and over again is that you're going down cards if your opponent deals with it, right? If I keep mutating onto the same creature, I might have used 3 cards to create this monster, and then my opponent kills it. They just 3-for-1 me. I might have gotten some value along the way because most things have mutate abilities, but they probably 3-for-1 me there, and they can get really far ahead. But a lot of these mutate cards also just give you card advantage when they mutate, right? Or at least a lot of these uncommons do. This one gives you a card back from your graveyard to your hand, a permanent, which matters. We've seen ones that draw cards, we've seen ones that bounce cards, we've seen ones that create 3/3 beast tokens, right? If you're just getting cards off of your mutate abilities, then you should feel a little bit better about mutating. And this is like a 4 mana 4/4. Most of these mutate creatures that we've seen, almost all of them are just like decent statted creatures that you can just cast without mutating, right? 4 mana 4/4. It's not like they push down the stats because you have this mutate option. No, they just made the stats normal. There's a lot of like 4 mana 3/4s and stuff like that, like 5 mana 4/4s, 5 mana 5/4. They're just normal creatures that have extra upside, which makes like every uncommon mutate card and every common mutate card like this split card of just a decent creature versus this aura type effect. And there's a lot of that going on in this set. Black green has this kind of graveyard synergy going on in the set, and this card seems like it's just going to fit perfectly. It's just a nice way to kind of recycle resources, and this has a lot of potential too to just kind of cycle through the same cards over and over again. Ikoria, I don't know if that's what this card is going to be named, or if that's what the card is supposed to be, but Ikoria seems like a pretty powerful card to me. And I keep saying that about every single mutate card, but have you read the mutate cards? They just seem like powerful cards. I don't know what else to say. Speaking of not powerful, Footwork Crater, or maybe this is better than I'm giving it credit for. Who knows? Footwork Crater is a single red mana for an uncommon aura. It enchants a land, and the land can tap to give target creature trample and haste until end of turn. It also cycles for a single colorless mana, so it's probably a shoe-in for most decks with big creatures, especially if you're in that red-green archetype we talked about that cares about trample in particular. This can be a nice way to spread out trample to your other creatures. It seems like it's one of the only ways so far to give haste in this set, contrary to what I thought in the first video I did for this. There are no haste counters in this set. There might be haste creatures, but there are 0 haste counters, which I find a little bit interesting. So if you want to give haste, this is fine. The problem with a card like this, and why I never run cards like this, is the same as like Escape Velocity, Crystal Slipper from Eldraine. These really cheap ways to just repeatedly give haste is because they usually suck and they're really bad when you're behind. This one is mitigated, or at least that second part about being behind is mitigated by the fact that this cycles super cheaply and that there is actually a cycling deck that might just want this because it's a 1 mana cycler. So this will probably see play. If you are in a deck with big creatures that can't smash through, you might be interested in this, but you do go down a card to do this sort of effect, right? A lot of times the analog to this in other sets will be a 1-mana 1/1 that taps to give a creature haste, right? We saw Goblin Motivator, I think, in one of the core sets recently, M19. There was Bloodlust Insider in Amonkhet, and people played those cards a lot, and they were kind of actually really strong on turn 1. This, not so much. And also, like, I think an easy thing to overlook here is that not only are you down a card when you play Footfall Crater, right? You haven't developed the board. You might be able to start bashing with creatures, but you're down a card to get this going. But you also have to overpay for most of your creatures moving forward, right? Because you have to tap a land to activate this ability. So if I want to, on turn 4, bash with my 4-drop, I'm not going to be able to because I have to tap out to play my 4-drop, and then this is already tapped because I had to use it for mana. So I have to wait till like turn 5 if I want to play my 4-drop and give it haste, which just doesn't make sense. I would rather play my 4-drop on turn 4 and be able to attack with it on turn 5 anyway. That's why I'm not a huge fan of these cards. They always ask you to play off curve to give you some extra bonus, and I'm not sure if tapping just to give trample is going to be that good or not. There are a lot of really big creatures, but we'll see whether it's worth going down the card or not. Cycling does kind of fix all the problems I'm saying here because you can include it, and if you're in a position where giving haste and trample to creatures is relevant, maybe you're in the late game and you're top decking creatures or something like that, then sure, Footfall Crater is fine, but you can always cycle it away if it's just in your opening hand or something like that. This is not a card you want to run out on like turn 1 on your way in and be like, haha, I did it, turn 1 Footfall Crater. It doesn't make sense. I would always cycle this on turn 1, but I don't know. It's not the cycling card that I'm really looking for because the cycling deck doesn't seem like it's going to care about haste and trample very much, and it's not really the big beater card that I'm looking for either because I'd rather have a way to ramp into a big creature or cheat a big creature into play or something like that, or just naturally find a trample creature as it is. So Footfall Crater, not something I'm super excited about, but maybe I stand to be corrected on that one. That's the type of card that could just completely wow me as the format goes on. If you're just looking to beat and you need haste and trample, sure. Next up, Migratory Great Horn. This guy has some gnarly horns. It's 3 and a green for a 3/4. See, that's what I'm talking about. You just got a 4-mana 3/4, which is a vanilla creature that you can put on a board and it has a meaningful effect, even if it did nothing else. And then you just get this mutate on top of it as well. So they didn't scale back the creatures in this set to make up for the fact that they have mutate. They made mutate kind of just risky enough that they, I guess, were justified making normal creatures with normal power and toughness and giving them a bunch of upside. The 2-for-1 nature of mutate means that, they could incentivize you to mutate by just having the alternative be a normal creature that you'd be happy to play. I guess that was kind of the design philosophy. At any rate, the mutate here is 2 and a green, and it says whenever this creature mutates, search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, shuffle your library. That's a pretty sweet clause, right? Also, you can start bashing with a 3/4 on turn 3 with this. If you have a 2-drop and then you mutate on turn 3, you get to ramp ahead, and your creature is now a 3/4 with this ability, which means you get a land every time you continue to mutate onto it. Seems pretty strong to me. The fact that this is a fallback 4-mana 3/4 is really powerful, and we are looking for ramp and mana fixing in this set. There's a lot of expensive cards that I want to cast a turn earlier, or a couple turn earliers if I can. Like, for example, just pulling this out of my hat, an old 9-mana 11/11 Trampler. It seems like the type of card that I want to put on the battlefield. If I can do that, 2 or 3 turns earlier, be pretty happy with it. And mana fixin is important as well because we are going to be pushed into 3 colors often. I think there's enough hybrid stuff going along that this is basically a 2-color format that has some really strong 3-color incentives. That's kind of how I'm viewing it. Similar to Khans of Tarkir, the kind of idea of Khans of Tarkir when you were drafting was you wanted to stick to one of the wedges, a 3-color wedge, but you want to be as close as possible to 2 of those colors and then make the 3rd color a splash, and I think I'm seeing something very similar here. But we've already seen some good mana fixing. There was the Explosive Vegetations with Cyclone. There was this card, which ramp stuff. There's Fertilid, and there's the Obelisks, or the Mana Rocks, I forget what they were called, crystals or something along those lines, and that's a lot of mana fixing already. Granted, most of it's centered in green, as it should be. So I imagine we're going to see those like green 5-color decks in this format. And Migratory Greathorn should be a pretty good reason to go into those decks. Not a reason, but a good payoff for having a multicolor deck. Couple more. I think just 2 more here to talk about. We have Ominous Seas. This is what I'm looking for when I talk about a Cyclone payoff, a reason to be in a Cyclone deck. Ominous Seas is 1 in a blue for a enchantment, and it says whenever you draw a card, put an Omen counter on Ominous Seas. So if a trample counter gives my creature trample, does an Omen counter give my creature Omen? Who knows? Anyway. Corny joke, sorry. Remove 8 Omen counters, create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token. And this itself has Cyclone for 2. Again, the fact that the Cyclone payoffs also have Cyclone to me is really good design. It just makes sure that the entire deck works with it, right? Maybe you don't want a second copy of Ominous Seas. Maybe you want to use the second copy to start feeling the first copy. Maybe you want both of them on board, and then your other payoffs you don't need as much because you've got a game plan with your Ominous Seas. It all kind of works together the way you want it to. Whereas previously, if you look back at Amonkhet, for example, a card like Faith of the Devoted, if you're getting beat down, Faith of the Devoted sucks. You're not going to have the time to stick that on board and start paying into it. But if that card had Cyclone, that would really just mitigate that downside, right? So there's not a lot of downside to having these Cyclone payoffs because if they're just not what you need at the time, you ship them away and draw something else. This one, it takes some time, right? Drawing 8 cards is not trivial, even in a Cyclone deck that's going to take a couple turns. But if, let's say 15 of the cards in your deck have Cyclone for 1 or 2 mana, you're going to be able to power out a 3 or an 8/8 probably every 3 turns or so, right? Because you're going to draw cards on your turn naturally. You might have extra draw spells in your deck, and then all of your cyclers put an additional counter on this. This doesn't ask that you cycle 8 cards. It asks that you cycle about 5 cards and wait a couple turns, which is asking a lot, right? There's a lot of cycling in this set, but I think if you can justify it and if you can supplement this with other payoffs or other good cards, ways to control the board, this can be a game plan. You might be able to make, 2 8/8 Krakens in a game if you can control the board well enough and you have enough actual cyclers. And that seems really powerful. You only paid 2 mana for this. If you can make a single 8/8 in a timely manner where that 8/8 is going to affect the board, that's going to be a good card. Obviously, if you pay this on turn 2 and then your entire 3rd turn you spend Cyclone, your entire 4th turn you spend Cyclone, you're probably getting beat down. Your opponent's setting up some huge mutate creature. You're getting destroyed. They're getting card advantage. I think you need other stuff, right? You can't just spend your entire 3rd and 4th turn cycling and then on turn 5 probably cycle some more and make an 8/8. It's not going to cut it, right? You need to, take some turns off, deal with threats when you can, and then cycle with the extra mana that you have floating, and then turn those into 8/8. So I do think Ominous Seas is a game plan in a can, if you will. And it seems like a solid one, but probably not one that I'm clamoring for. This is the type of card, though. This is the type of card that if you watch Byforce on my channel, it's a series where I go on draft on Arena, and I pick an archetype ahead of time, and I just force that archetype no matter what. This is the type of card that really entices me to want to do a Byforce deck for the Cyclone deck. So we'll see if the tools are all there, and it does seem like the tools are there. Speaking of which, here's another tool. Rooting Molech. Rooting Molech. 5 mana. It's 4 and a red for a 4/4. It is a lizard. And it says whenever it enters the battlefield, this is pretty cool. Whenever it enters the battlefield, exile target card with a Cyclone ability from your graveyard until the end of your next turn. You may play that card. And again, it cycles itself. It has 2 cycle this away, which is awesome. It's just fantastic that every card that cares about cycling also has cycling in the set. That's just really good design philosophy, I think. Again, makes the whole deck tick. But this is a really sweet card because sometimes it feels bad cycling away kind of your big dorky creature because you want to play that card. You want to play your 11/11 Trample, or you want to play your Omen of the Seas. You built your whole deck to make it work, but you're getting beat down, so you have to cycle it away and hope that you find ways to interact and find some other way to win. Rooted Molech kind of not only pays you off for cycling, but makes it less risky that you might lose an actual win condition. Rooted Molech says, hey, you're going to get this card back. You better cast it next turn because it does give you until the end of your next turn. But Rooted Molech makes it less of a disappointment to cycle away some of your more important cards in the early game, as it gives you an opportunity to give you that card back. And this is just a really sweet card advantage card, right? Maybe if you have multiples of these, they can kind of like loop each other too. It is an uncommon, so that's not very likely, but if you play a Rootin' Molech and then it dies and you have another Rootin' Molech, you can target the first one, exile that, and then just keep playing them, which probably won't come up that often. This is a 5-mana play. It's a 4/4. Like, if your Molechs are dying over and over again, you probably got worse things to deal with on board. But it's a sweet card, right? It's just going to give you one of your Cyclone cards back, and that's pretty exciting to me. It seems like the type of card that if I'm in the Cyclone deck, I'm happy to play this, and you probably don't even have to be in the Cyclone deck for this to just be solid. I think most decks, even if you're not like Jeskai Cyclers or something like that in Limited, you're probably going to be happy enough to just play a couple Cyclone cards in your deck, and if you happen to be playing red, you should probably be putting a Molech in your deck if you have at least 2 or 3 other cards that are worth cycling away or stuff like that. This is the type of card that's nice to have those sideboard cards in, right? Like the Shred-In Sales. You could just pitch that away because you don't anticipate using it, and then the Molech gives you a second opportunity to potentially use it if it turns out that that card is going to have a significant effect on the game. So I believe that's going to go ahead and cover all that we have for standard cards right now. It is, at least on Mythic Spoiler. I'm not going to go scouring other sites every 5 seconds, but there we go. Just a small little batch of cards. I believe I'll probably be back on Monday. I don't anticipate there being a bunch of spoilers on a Sunday, but if there are, we'll go ahead and do that separately. I'm also going to go ahead and cover these Commander cards above me in a separate video here, so be tuned for that if Commander is more your style. And again, thanks for hanging out with me. It's just fun to talk about the cards, get a little bit long-winded on, some commons and uncommons, but I just love talking about new cards, so I hope you love hearing about it. That's going to go ahead and do it. Remember to subscribe below if this has been meaningful to your day in any way, shape, or form. You can show some appreciation by hitting the button down there. And if you don't, that's cool too. Thanks for hanging out. Find us on Twitter, MTG_ManaRocks. Thank you all for watching. My name's Timothy, and I'll see you all next time.